first regular meeting of the Nevada Unified School District 711 District Advisory Committee. I want to thank everybody who is showing up on our Zoom screen tonight, all of our committee members and our alternates. You've decided to be part of the solution. Too many times in our society today, people just want to point out problems, but I appreciate that all of you have said, I want to step up and I want to be a part of the solution. We're still meeting remotely due to the pandemic. Anytime that we're meeting remotely, there's the opportunity for technology challenges to arise. So I want to acknowledge that at some point over the course of this time, each of us is going to have some sort of challenge that confronts us. Know that we all understand, we've all been there. We do hope that we don't have some of those super embarrassing technology mishaps, like maybe somebody walking by in the background that's not quite prepared to be in the background. But all in all, we're going to get through this. We're going to be productive even in the virtual environment. And I just appreciate everybody being here. So I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. We can see everybody who is present. We can see everyone's names. We got one more person connecting. It looks like it's Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. She's popping in right now. So the first thing that I'm supposed to do is to welcome you. And again, you know, we're in an interesting environment where we're in a public meeting. It's a formal meeting. It is governed by the Brown Act. We're a group of people that haven't gotten any chance to get to know each other, and now we're working in a virtual world. That's going to present some challenges to us. We will try to find ways over the next couple meetings to give us a chance to have more interaction with each other so we can get to know each other while also following the rules associated with the Brown Act. So more to come on that. And I just, again, want to thank you for choosing to be part of the solution to some of the important challenges that are facing Nevada Unified. And, you know, I'll highlight a couple of them. You know, we want to make sure that we are good stewards of Nevada's resources, their dollars that come to us in the form of taxes, come to us in the form of revenue. And so, you know, we've been in declining enrollment in Nevada for several years. And, you know, there's been lots of conversation about the potential for closing an elementary school, and that's kind of gotten kicked down the road a little bit. And now this committee is going to explore that in a more concrete way than we have in the past. We talked about that with the reentry task force a couple of years ago. They made lots of recommendations. We've implemented those recommendations. And now we still find ourselves in a place with declining enrollment in the same number of schools. We're also going to be looking just at where our students are attending school, where they live. What would the impacts be of closing any of those schools on students, on families, on the district, and on our finances? We will also look at other unutilized and underutilized properties that exist within the district, because we want to make sure that we're making the best short-term and long-term fiscal goals. Another thing that could play a factor in this is the conversation around staff housing. The beauty of building staff housing on already existing district properties is that we own the properties. We don't pay property tax on those properties, so it's easier for us to be able to present our staff with the opportunity of having below cost housing opportunities that can hopefully then allow them to save money, that'll allow them to get into the housing market in a place where it's very, very expensive to do. So lots of big goals for this committee. We're going to get through as many of them as we can. We're going to follow a very strict process. I will be playing a large part in the leadership of this. Will be supported by some of the consultants that you just met, particularly Jennifer Gibb and Rob Murray from King Consulting. So with that introduction done, and a big, big, big thank you to each of you, I am going to turn it over to Jen, and Jen is going to talk with you a little bit about public comment and how public comment is going to happen during these meetings.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so The public comment, hold on, there's a very strict process for, or detailed process for public comment. So if a community member would like to make public comment on any agendized item or non-agendized item, please join the Zoom webinar listed in this agenda. Once you're in the webinar, please use the raise your hand feature to let me, the meeting moderator, know that you would like to make a public comment. Really need you to understand that general comments on items that are not on the agenda can be shared during the non-agenda public comment section of the agenda. Comments specific to a particular agenda item must be expressed while the 7-Eleven committee is considering that agenda item. The total time for public input is limited to 20 minutes per agenda item per board bylaw 9323. We are adhering to the 3-minute limit per live comment. Each person may only speak once per agenda topic. Participants who are intentionally disruptive during the meeting, if you're using any profanity, obscenities, or discriminatory language, we will remove you from the public comment portion. Your comments will become part of the public record, and the Zoom webinar chat is collecting public comments only, so it's not a back and forth. If you have any questions for the committee, please submit them to 7-1111 committee@nusd.org. And future meetings, if you'd like to submit a comment in writing, you can refer to NUSD's 7-Eleven committee webpage for public comment form. And then those comments will be submitted to staff. They must be received by 4 o'clock on the day before the 7-Eleven committee meeting in order to distribute them to the full committee prior to the meeting for review. Submitted written comments will not be read aloud during the meeting.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate that. The next item on our agenda is the approval of our agenda. So each of you has gotten a copy of the agenda. This is our time to make any adjustments to the agenda if necessary. And if there are no necessary changes to the agenda, then I would request that someone make a motion to approve the agenda.
I make the.
So it looks like Sylvia made a motion
I'll
to
second.
approve the agenda, and that was Ron Gerber made a motion to second the agenda. All in favor? Let's
Aye.
raise our hands, and if you can, say aye.
Aye.
And so, and I'm sorry, before we vote, I should clarify something. We have on the screen, we have a mix of 3 different groups of people. We have our voting members, we have our alternate members for right now, and we have our other presenter type folks. So what I would ask is that our presenter members, or excuse me, our committee members be the only ones to vote now. And what I will do is I will ask if they're all in favor to raise their hand, and then I will more closely watch when I ask all opposed, because that'll help me to make sure that I'm catching any opposition. So all in favor of the members? Okay, anyone opposed? Okay, so I see all of our committee members voted in favor of the motion, and there were no opposed. So the motion passes to approve the agenda. Thank you for that. The next step is non-agenda public comment, and I will check in with Jen and Rob to see if we have anybody online for non-agenda public comment. Jennifer, do we have?
Sorry,
I can see none.
Okay, so no non-agenda public comment, so we can keep moving forward. With that, I really am pleased that we have the opportunity to have Janet Mueller here to talk with us about some important aspects of this meeting, particularly that pertain to the way that we have to interact as a group as an active committee governed by the Brown Act. She'll talk with us about, we've all heard a little bit about the Brown Act. She will talk with us about some more specific things about that, including some very recent changes that even if we think we're experts on the Brown Act, this is something that changes and evolves all the time. And there have been some significant changes recently. And then you'll have a chance to be able to ask your personal questions to Janet, because as I work with one of our new trustees here in NUSD, the rules are just mind-boggling, and they seem to be so limiting. And so if you have questions, if you say, now I just want to make sure that I heard that right, please ask those questions now. Now is the best time to figure out the answers to them. And in the future, while Janet won't be in our meetings, should you have questions, you can always ask me those questions and I can get them to Janet to get answers for you. Okay, I want to make sure that we really get this right. NUSD takes our commitment to the Brown Act very, very seriously, just because we feel like it's the right thing to do. So with that, Janet, take it away.
All right, thank you, Chris, for that introduction. Bear with me here. I'm going to do a screen share. Uh-oh, host disabled screen sharing. Can I be enabled to do that?
David is working on that as we speak. I can't see him working on it, but I know he's working on it.
Maybe that was, all right. Maybe you can just flag me if when it's time. I will say, just as we're kind of waiting for that to happen, you know, I've been a practitioner in this area of school district, real property, finance, just kind of asset management. And I will tell you, I never go through a process like this without reading my education code over and over again. You're hardy souls, you've embarked on helping the school district do something that is actually quite complex. Your feedback will be very, very important, but as the district moves through trying to implement recommendations and or decisions that they make about these issues, it's a complex process, not very intuitive. So there's a lot to it. I'm going to try to cover a lot of concepts tonight, but maybe not even in the greatest amount of detail that you may ultimately want to hear about it. So let me. All right, so can I get a thumbs up if you can see that PowerPoint slide? Okay, great. So let me go ahead. So Chris mentioned a few of the topics we'll be covering. I think I've got about 45 minutes. Chris, please, when I'm going on and on and on and it's getting late, please just you know, unmute yourself and tell me to speed it up. The role and purpose of your committee, how the committee's been composed and why, the duties that you'll have. We're going to hit on a very high level overview of the surplus property disposition process. And I say that because once you've made some recommendations to the board, it will really be the board going through actual implementation of the concepts, whether they're sales, leases, or otherwise. But it's good to know what those limitations are. And then, as Chris mentioned, we're going to come back at the end and close it out with a kind of basic overview of the Brown Act and just general rules about your interactions and how you conduct your meetings. So we'll dive right in. So big picture legislative intent regarding the 7-Eleven committee, or actually you're really a property advisory committee, which is kind of colloquially known as a 7-Eleven committee because it has a minimum of 7 and a maximum of 11 members. So we tend to refer to them as the 7-Eleven committee. And the big picture concept here is that a certain surplus property leases and dispositions provide for community involvement. And this community involvement should facilitate making the best possible judgments about the use of excess school facilities in each individual situation. So it's really a focus on community being involved in some of the questions that Nevada Unified is facing right now. And secondly, that the community be involved before decisions are made about school closure or the use of surplus space, thus avoiding community conflict and assuring building use that's compatible with the community's needs and desires. And I've given you education code citations for those of you that love to look at source material. It's very easy to find the education code online and to look at some of those statutes if you ever want to be reminded of what some of these rules are, or what the legislature has told us. So the way that this happens, sometimes it can be because there's a specific issue or a specific property that the district is considering selling, leasing, or otherwise disposing of. Sometimes it's really just that the district wants to get a handle on, kind of programmatically and big picture, what's happening with asset management and real estate within the school district. But the actual very specific legal mandate that the district is under is that it must appoint a district advisory committee to advise the board prior to lease or sale of excess real property. So that is the sort of trigger for when a 7-Eleven committee must be appointed and come together to aid the board, to advise the board in developing district-wide policies and procedures for the use or disposition of school buildings or space that's no longer needed for school purposes. And we'll talk a little bit about, the difference between something that is, when is property truly surplus to what a district might need. So I think of the 7-Eleven committee as being really the first step in what ultimately can become a very lengthy and detailed process of disposing of property that's no longer needed for school purposes. And I think with another district I'm working with, we're probably in the third year after a 7-Eleven committee came to be and closed 4 schools and has spent just an excessive amount of, not excessive, it's actually not that abnormal, trying to find who is out there in the market for developing closed school sites. So in other words, it can be a very lengthy process, and you all are the first step. And it's important to understand that you serve as an advisory function to the Novato Unified School District Board. And ultimately what you will do as part of your duties and talking with community and sort of putting your heads together on different options is that you will write a report, you will prepare that for the board will consider that report, accept that report. They will ultimately, though, be the ones who decide which recommendations to implement. It's possible you'll come up with a report that has a number of options, and the board will really just be advised of your recommendations, and they will then move forward to make certain decisions. So having said all of that, the legal mandate to have a 7-Eleven committee provide recommendations doesn't apply in every instance. I think the school board is tasking you with some of these things in its discretion. But for example, the Ed Code does not require a 7-Eleven committee to weigh in on a rental for less than 30 days, rentals to private schools for summer school programs. Very interestingly, the development of teacher housing, something brand new, like as of January 1, or actually it might have been September with some of the urgency legislation as a result of the pandemic. The sale or lease of property that is not operated or hasn't been operated or constructed to be operated for school purposes. So that would be like a piece of vacant land. There's been a little bit of until 2024, that isn't mandatorily to be part of a 7-Eleven committee process. And then I also wanted to note charter school housing, which interestingly has its own legal scheme that may or may not come into play in any particular situation. And then the other interesting issue here, although I did reference on a prior slide, a reference to school closure, technically a 7-Eleven committee is not required to review on an actual school closure. It is permissive, it's encouraged by the legislature, but it's not required. But having said all that, again, I just want to stress that all of these things are kind of interwoven, and it becomes very difficult when you are looking at a comprehensive set of issues, as I think Novato Unified is looking at. We're not really just picking and choosing these things. They're all interwoven. And so at the end of the day, you may actually be looking at and recommending and opining on some of these items because they're all kind of part of a bundle, maybe an interacting bundle of issues. And on the issue of school closure, I would say that we don't have a lot of law, but what we do have are some best practices that the California Department of Education have put out. in a very readable, fairly short advisory. It's easy to find on the internet or on the CDE website by just looking for school closure. It'll pop right up, or I can send a link, or perhaps Jennifer, you have that, or we'll share it at some future meeting. But it's helpful because in the absence of a set of legal criteria, I think it's helpful to have an education body, the state, saying there are a lot of considerations here, and here's just sort of a set of concepts or ideas. Again, discretionary as far as whether that's the right framework for you all, but maybe some helpful guidance. In terms of, you know what, I can't, because of the mode that we're in, I can't see everybody. So I welcome anybody who wants to unmute or otherwise flag me if there's a question as we go, or we can just kind of do questions at the end too. I'm whatever works for you all. In terms of the composition, well, you're here, you've been selected, but I think the committee was selected because the education code does require, as I mentioned, not less than 7 or more than 11 members. We'll come back to the concept of alternates in a moment. And the code requires that it be a representative body and provides some guidance as far as what kinds of groups ought to be represented on the 7-Eleven committee. And I've listed them all there. You can read them. It's a wide variety of different kinds of people with different stakeholder interests in the community and in the school district. Certainly kind of an interest and maybe even some expertise in some of the issues that are likely to come up as you consider some of these concepts is certainly helpful. But I think the goal is really that we get a robust representation of different stakeholder groups, less so focused on folks who are from individual school sites and more just a cross-section of interests across the district. So my understanding is that the board elected that we have 11 members and that we have 4 alternates. And so my understanding is that the alternates will participate in meetings, but the alternates will not vote unless there is somebody who is absent from a meeting, if that's correct. I see you nodding, Chris, but I know that there was some maybe thought and discussion given to this. I do think there could end up being some questions about quorum and Brown Act and conduct outside of meetings. And so I'll come back to making some recommendations for you along those lines, just because we probably want to be more conservative on the issue of how we interact outside of meetings.
So Janet, just on the topic of membership and alternates, like for example, we have one of our members not present tonight. And so I think that for that night, what we would do is we would move forward with the 12 members. We would investigate, what was the reason why the person couldn't be here? Were they having a hard time with the login or something else? And then we would determine if we felt after the meeting we needed to replace them with one of the alternates. Because one of the things we were clear on is that you have to attend every meeting, and if you couldn't, you would be replaced. But I think for the purposes just of continuity in the meeting, we would continue forward with the 13 members are the 13 members for this meeting. And then if that could change, but it wouldn't change until next meeting with one of the alternates moving up if necessary.
Well, the one comment I would make, Chris, is that for each meeting, we have to make sure we have a quorum and we need to decide what is the quorum. And so if it's an 11-member committee, I would suggest we anchor with 11, and so 6 is a quorum.
Correct.
And then only if we haven't been able to achieve the quorum or we have a member that needs to be replaced, we'll call upon the alternates. There could be some nuance there that I haven't totally thought through, but that's an issue we can, I think, kind of evaluate as the committee goes forward.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, Janet. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So the duties of the 7-Eleven committee are actually described in Education Code 17390 if you'd like to take a look at it. And it is going to be, I think, a lot of these issues and items that you're required to consider and or do will be facilitated, I think, as part of Jennifer's, process for providing data to the committee and sort of getting everybody up to speed. It's basically, reviewing enrollment and other data to determine the amount of surplus space and property within the district. establishing a priority list of uses of surplus space that are acceptable to the community, circulating lists of spaces, providing for hearings for community input on acceptable uses of space. So there will be, I think, some hearings throughout this process, and then ultimately taking all of that information and preparing a report to the school board recommending uses of surplus space and real property. That's all very, I would say, high-level description of what the committee will do. And we'll look for thoughts and recommendations from King Consulting as far as how will we in each meeting sort of tackle this list of things. What kinds of information should we be looking at, talking about, and considering, and then what is the best way to involve the community and get community feedback as you go through the process of considering what the district is facing and or considering with its sites. So ultimately, over this period of time that you'll be meeting and doing this work, you will finish that work and do a report. You'll provide that report to the board. And then the school board will consider the recommendations. They might accept or reject recommendations. They may implement some, not others, right? The board ultimately will have the decision-making authority here as far as what to do. In my experience, the committee's job typically ends with the report to the board. Unless the board were to decide, now we're going to do an RFP, or we're going to try to implement some of these ideas, and we'd like the committee to continue its work and help us vet potential lessees, sites. But typically your work, and I think in the absence of a board direction, otherwise your job will finish with the preparation of a report. The committee's recommendations will ultimately be followed by board actions that could be to close or consolidate school campuses, to declare property to be surplus or not, and then ultimately to implement a disposition or development plan for lands or sites. And so some of these words can be a little bit confusing, but in my mind, not all closed sites may or should be declared surplus. There are many times when it doesn't make economic sense or otherwise to keep a school site going in the form that it has been. But it may make sense for the district to repurpose that site to some other district use. It could be an administrative use. It could be there's all kinds of things, that districts do as community centers that may be a reason that the school would not be surplus. It would be kept and used for a different purpose. So when we talk about closing and surplusing, those are actually slightly different concepts that will be important to keep in mind. In addition, sometimes I put a bookmark here for charter schools. Sometimes, although in the past there was a priority for the use of surplus sites or closed sites for charters, there is no longer such a priority. There was a pilot program that went on for a number of years that ended. That said, school districts are required to provide housing to their charter schools that operate in their district under specific circumstances, under a statutory scheme. And that, to me, is a mandate of a school district, could be a reason why you don't declare a property to be surplus, because you may have a need to house a charter school. So there's definitely some nuances here that could come into play with regard to kind of the ultimate decisions that the board makes. And I think one final comment that I wanted to make that I didn't make it onto the slide, and it may or may not be too critically important tonight, but when a school district makes a decision to close a school, in addition to having had some feedback, taking some feedback from the 7-Eleven committee on that issue, we will need to do an environmental review. And what that means is that the environmental law is concerned with when you close a school campus, and that by definition means the students will now go somewhere else to school. And there are circumstances in which making that decision could create impacts on what we call the receptor schools, traffic impacts, particularly traffic, I would say. Traffic, parking. It's possible you have to expand campuses to accommodate additional students. And so there is an environmental analysis piece of that decision that may be going alongside the process that you all are engaging in as you're looking and thinking about school closures. Okay, so in terms of surplus property disposition, I mentioned at the beginning, this is a very complex complex area. In your packet of information, I included like a little 2-page flow chart from a publication that we produce that I'm not going to cover specifically, but it kind of illustrates, and that's just a really streamlined chart, the multiple and sometimes crazy feeling steps that come into play once a board decides that a property is surplus and it should be disposed of. Now, there are some reasons why a board might decide we're not going to lease or sell it. There are some other kinds of schemes, such as a property exchange. I'm not going to get into too much detail here, where the district has flexibility to do something with the property that does not mandate that we take it through this very multi-step process. And that's where we get into some pretty nuanced, kinds of issues. But I will say that just as a big high-level proposition, almost never, outside of a few limited exceptions, may a school district simply negotiate with a buyer or lessee of its choice because the legislature regards school property as gold and that it needs to be kept available to community, especially if it's got a recreational component to it, and that certain agencies should get first dibs. Certain functions are more important than others. And at the end of the day, if you do all that and still you don't have someone who's going to take it from you, you got to put it out to bid and get the best bid. So almost never do we get to just say, you know what, there is a developer across town who thinks this would be a perfect place to do X. Let's sell it to them. Okay, so that kind of way of thinking, unfortunately, I mean, school districts are some of the most highly regulated agencies in the state, and particularly when it comes to their real estate assets. So it's a multi-step process. So just very briefly, once the board decides a certain properties are surplus and should be disposed of, we're going to establish a price through an appraisal process or a formal or informal process. We have to give some notices to our local planning bodies. Not that they really have jurisdiction here, but it's more of a notice requirement. They're required to decide if your plans to sell or lease are consistent with the city's general plan. We are going to have to.
Oh, Janet, I have a question. Yeah,
Yes.
this is Ron Gerber. I have a question where it says establish price or lease rate. Isn't it true that when you're looking at, let's call it a fair market value, its very definition is what will the market pay? So whatever appraisers might think, until it actually goes out to the open market, it may be far more. And so my question is, does the statute require that you do an appraisal first, or can you let the market determine it by just taking it out to the market? Thank you.
Well, so any appraiser, and I defer to appraisers with experience in this area, but I think any appraiser is going to, just like they do for other kinds of properties, are going to look for comparables. And of course, there are, sometimes it's a pretty skinny list because, how often do you have a school site being sold or leased? But interestingly enough, I just went through a process like this to establish a fair market lease rate. It was surprising how many school site leases, they were able to find to use to establish that fair market rate. Now, when the board actually offers the property out for sale or lease, we have to establish the price. We have to specify the minimum price. Now, do we have to have a full appraisal? Can we do something informal? We could probably do something informal. But we are going to have to go through some sort of process to come up with that so that we can specify it right up front. I will bookmark that slightly because there's a section of the Education Code called the Naylor Act. The Naylor Act applies to portions, either school property or portions of school property that is considered recreational. I'll go through an actual definition here. And the reason this is important is that the legislature has said that it's critically important to communities that there be open space and play space and recreational space, and that we not lose that kind of space in these situations. And so when we have that kind of space and the conditions are exactly right, there's certain limits on it, we really gotta offer it to our Park and Rec department folks first. And I think some of the challenges of that process are that when we do that, we're only able to sell it for just a fraction of its fair market value. There's actually some formulas in the Education Code. So it's a drastically reduced price. It has to minimally be 25%, I think, of fair market value. But there's some formulas in there. So we, as part of this process, we have to decide what within this group of properties that we're looking at might actually fall under the Naylor Act based on the circumstances. So that's one critical evaluation issue. When we're talking about, actually it's a little bit misleading, there is a priority in the Education Code for childcare uses for sales or leases. It's optional on the part of the district. There is a mandate that we offer classroom space to our local SELPA for special education purposes if it's going to be leased. So we got a couple of like little priority agencies. And then after we get through all of that, there's this, when it comes to sales or leases with option to purchase, a lengthy list of what I call priority offerees in a descending order of like, it starts with Parks and Rec, and it goes to cities and counties and UC, and it's this lengthy list. I do believe in the law during the pandemic, when we were getting a little bit of relief from some of the extreme process associated with disposing of property, there was a change I have to look at more carefully, which allows us to maybe make all of our offers all at once, rather than otherwise it's like, first you do the Park and Rec department and you wait 60 days. And then if they don't respond, then you move to this agency and you wait, and it can take forever. So I do think the legislature has offered a little bit of procedural relief here. But that's going to be an area where there's a lot more kind of detail procedurally to it. So just coming back real quick to the Naylor Act, because this could come into play for you all. The Naylor Act is applicable if property is, and I've listed it there, consists of land that has been used for at least 8 years, maybe the immediate preceding 8 years, I think, for playground, playing fields, or outdoor recreational purposes, or it's open space land particularly suited for recreational purposes, and no other publicly owned land in the vicinity is adequate to meet the needs of the community for outdoor recreational purposes. That is something that actually has to be established and documented by an agency that might want to acquire your property under the Naylor Act. So there are some limits. Well, as I mentioned, there are limits on the amount you can sell or lease that property for. But in addition, there are some caps on it. For example, I think that only 30% of your available surplus land has to go through the Naylor Act. So those could come into play here. I don't know based on the facts and circumstances here, but it's to keep in mind that basically, as you think about this, recreation, childcare and special education and recreational uses are high value under the legislative scheme. And it's not that other things are not possible; they certainly are. But when we go through this process, we'll be thinking about whether we have any of those kinds of users or agencies that may be interested.
Hi, Janet.
Yes.
My name is Almas. I have a quick question. Thank you for explaining everything so well. What is the criteria of vicinity? How you define that? What is like how many miles? when you're
You know,
saying that the
I'm not
things
sure.
in
I don't know that the education code gives us guidance on that particular issue.
okay,
But I would be happy to look at the specific definition again. I don't know. I think that that's an issue where you could kind of reasonably interpret what the vicinity is. I don't know that it would necessarily be the whole school district. I think it would probably be more neighborhood focused for where the property is located. So good. That's a great question. I don't know that the code really provides us any more specificity than that, but I'll check on that.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Back to Chris if there's a definition. I don't think there is though. After we go through this process of like offers and seeing if folks want the property, which is mostly a process we go through for sales of property or lease with option to purchase. For most leases, after offering it for special education use, we can go right to public bidding. So the idea is that we need to maximize the return for these properties. And so bidding, a public bid process is required if property is being made available for lease, which very likely many districts lease their property as opposed to selling it. Or you've gone through this offering process, nobody has stepped up, nobody really wants your property, so you're going to then resort to a bid process. And the board has some flexibility for deciding the criteria, price, terms, number of years, perhaps even the use, the kinds of uses they're looking for. The bid process itself is quite prescribed. It is a very awkward thing to try to sell property or lease property by competitive bid because you can't really control very well, you know, who comes forward. And, you know, the idea of awarding it to the best bidder can be a little bit challenging. So there is a multi-step process there, you know, with the board kicking off that process through a board action, with an advertising and a distribution of the bid package, a written offer process, followed by a verbal offer process at a board meeting, and ultimately, hopefully, resulting in the award of a bid. Now, I noted here on this slide, obtaining a waiver of the bidding requirements is fairly common. Districts, in order to get a waiver of the education code, they must ask the State Board of Education for that waiver. And I don't know that we're there at all yet here, but it just to kind of bookmark that most districts struggle with the bidding process. It's awkward. They want to have a little bit more control over, you know, who we're bringing in as a tenant, for example. And it's not that uncommon to seek a waiver, and the state is usually amenable to it as long as you do some sort of a competitive process, RFP, request for proposals process, where you're not necessarily required to award based on price. It could be a variety of factors that make sense to the district in terms of finding a suitable buyer or lessee. All right, and then we're almost done here. So prior to September of 2020, the use of income from surplus property disposal was fairly limited. Generally had to be restricted to capital use. However, in light of the pandemic, the economic contraction of and the state's inability to really fully fund, or, you know, deferrals that have happened on state funding, the legislature approved a use of sale proceeds for one-time general fund use for a specific number of years. I will say there is a state allocation board, that is what SAB stands for, approval process if you want to do this. There are requirements that must be met. It's not just a free pass. There are some things that have to be taken into consideration, because the amount has to be net of the amount of bond funds used to improve the property, perhaps the developer fee funds that were used to improve the property. So it's got a number of hoops to jump through, but was widely hailed as a good form of relief for school districts to be able to make use of these proceeds. I will say I always believed the use of lease income was free, was not restricted to capital use. So I personally think that what the legislature did here was a little ambiguous because it raises a question now as to whether we have to go through that SAB process in order to use lease income for general fund use. I would like to think not. I've tried to confer with the state allocation board about that, and I just haven't gotten a good answer. So that's, I think, something if the district is looking at doing, we'll want to spend more time looking into. All right, we're going to totally pivot and talk about the Brown Act now. So maybe before we leave that area of the committee and what the committee does and sort of the overall purpose, this would be a good time to check for questions.
Janet, this is Ron Gerber. Would it be helpful at some point, if appropriate, just to give the group some specific quick examples of some of the really wonderful ways in which school districts have disposed of property and some of the wonderful benefits they've realized from it? Because there are so many really good examples. One that comes to mind fairly recently was in Orinda. They had a drastic need for facilities, certain new facilities. They didn't have the money for it. They sold the property to Pulte Homes, who did two things. They not only wrote them a big check for the property, but they either developed or caused to be developed the new facilities. That was a really kind of a great win-win. I know the district in San Mateo County had done a great job for developing housing, and how that was really well done with the district for both faculty and staff. And then a really great example in San Francisco to do ongoing revenue leased property to a developer, which gave them the benefit two ways: not only an ongoing revenue stream that had regular bumps in the lease, but also they got the pro rata share of the property tax on it. And you know, the Nordstrom Center in San Francisco, the undergrounding landowner of that is the school district. So I think there's some great examples, and it may not be right now, but I think as the committee goes through its process, may be helpful just to kind of give some nice examples, because districts have been doing such a great job over the years to really do a lot of benefits for the community and also for housing as well as ongoing revenue. Thank you.
Right. Okay. No, I completely agree. I think there are probably many good examples, and maybe some of those case studies could come forward as part of future committee meetings, or I don't know if Jennifer, if you have kind of examples or things you've worked on that could be good case studies. We could certainly probably find a few districts who would be willing to share that information or share their stories and experiences.
Absolutely.
Sylvia, did you have a question?
Me? Yeah, I have a question actually. It could be for Jenna, or also could be for you, Chris. Because I understand that Jenna, you went through the whole process from advisory committees through how the board would decide and how to dispose of the property. So I'm just trying to figure out, as a committee, advisory committee member, you know, our duty ends when we made our proposal to the board. So the question is, within 2.5 months, I'm a little bit concerned about how do we do all that, you know, trying to learn, you know, what about the school population, the budget and whatnot. And then also, how do we figure out how much each property will bring back to the district, so we can make a sound judgment about which one should be closed? Would that be enough? You know, we go through this process, maybe it won't work at all. Then why do we want to make a proposal? I think it's just a little bit of timing, philosophical, and also where does it end? Where does it go from here?
Yeah, happy to have our consultant Jennifer touch on the answers to some of your questions there.
Thank you, Chris. We'll definitely, Sylvia, we have a presentation after this that will touch on the steps that we're going to walk the committee through and the opportunities that we're going to be analyzing in regards to data that will absolutely answer all the questions, or hopefully answer all the questions that you just addressed. So that's the process. So once we get to that presentation, we'll walk through it. I don't want to repeat it twice, but that will definitely be addressed later in tonight's meeting.
And we do want to acknowledge that we're going to do a lot in a short period of time. That's why we're going to be really focused on starting on time, being really efficient and effective in our meeting processes, but giving things the time that it takes to get to the right place. So I think we're in good shape.
Thank you, both. 3.
Okay. Chris, time check. How much time do I have at this point to get through? About 10 minutes or?
Yeah, about
Yeah,
20.
about 10 more minutes would be
10 more
great.
minutes. Okay, great. All right. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the Brown Act. The Brown Act is what governs your meetings as a body. Having been appointed by the school board, you are essentially considered by the Brown Act to be a legislative body, and thus you are subject to its requirements. And probably most of you are active community members. You may attend meetings of other public agencies, and so you kind of have this idea, or you've learned a little bit along the way about some of the constraints and some of what that means. But I think sometimes when you're subject to, it's actually a little bit, it can be deceptive. And don't want to worry you all as much as give you some basic guidance and tips. And I think if you keep a few basic concepts in mind, you'll be just fine over the few months that you'll be meeting. So let's jump in. So the intent of the Brown Act is to keep the public informed of the actions, debates, and views of locally elected representatives. Now, when I say that, you're not elected, but you're sort of functioning in that capacity. So the idea is to make sure that as you're making your decisions, having your discussions, you are keeping the public informed through your meetings, what you're talking about, what you're thinking about, and ultimately what you're going to be recommending. Secondly, to provide a procedural framework for local legislators to meet, debate, act, and listen collectively to their constituents. So you now have constituents, which are the members of the public who want to participate in your meetings and learn what you are doing and talking about. So if you keep your eye focused on the ultimate goal of the Brown Act, which is to keep the public informed, I think that will help guide you in your interactions. So it's very critically important to understand what the definition of a meeting is under the Brown Act. And so it's very specific. It's a congregation of a majority of the members of a legislative body at the same time and place, including teleconference locations, to hear, discuss, or deliberate upon any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of that body. So I highlighted a few different words here. So the reason that understanding what a meeting is that when you meet, you must have noticed, you must have created an agenda, and you must provide notice to the public of the fact that you intend to meet, and also what you intend to discuss. So when we think about your body, you are an 11-member body. A majority of you would be 6. Okay. So it's also really critical to know that it's not just about a time you might get together and vote on something. It's a time that you might get together and just chat among yourselves, listen to each other, hear from each other without making any decisions, without deliberating per se. And so that's where this can get a little bit tricky. So real simple example, we're here in a meeting tonight. We've properly noticed and agendized our meeting. We have asked for public comment. We have, I think, members of the public who are participating today. So it's become a little harder to see who's here and now that we're in this virtual world, but we presumably have members of the public who are listening in. Now, if you all leave this meeting and 6 of you walk into the parking lot as well, actually, you're not together, but let's just say you were, and you say, hey, let's go over to, boy, we heard a lot tonight. Anybody want to meet? Chat about this a little bit. When 6 of you do that, even though you don't have any intention of really making any decisions, you've actually just held a meeting, and it's an illegal meeting because you didn't notice and agendize it. You didn't do it in a way and to meet the requirements of the Brown Act. So that's why it's important to know. And so in a physical sense, in a normal environment, and I know we're in a virtual environment, but in a typical environment, that congregation is easy to know when you're congregating. It gets a little bit more complex when you are in the virtual world and or when you may start communicating in other ways. So real quickly before we get to some of those scenarios, a meeting does not include individual contacts, communications, or telephone conversations between a committee member and any other person, including another committee member, that don't constitute discussion, deliberation, or taking action on committee business. So in other words, you can talk to another person, you can talk to a few other people, okay? That's not a meeting unless you have a setup in which you have one person who's communicating with members and then communicating your opinion or your view to other members, okay? So this usually happens inadvertently, not deliberately, but it's hard sometimes to script the way that folks like to communicate. So what the Brown Act has said is that a majority of the members of a body outside of a noticed meeting cannot use a series of communications directly or through intermediaries or technological devices to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of business within the committee's jurisdiction. So what does this mean? Well, this would mean, for example, you'll have a chairperson. At some point, you will select a chairperson. This chairperson will be trying to pull meeting agendas together, and the chairperson might go to one member and say, Member A, what do you think? Should we discuss this very difficult issue? What do you think about this issue? G, do you think Member B is going to be upset if we discuss this issue? And Member A gives the opinion to the chairperson. The chairperson says, thank you, Member A, then goes to Member B, says, Member B, I want to know what you think about putting these items on the agenda, or what do you think we should do about this situation? And you can see what could happen is, and then they'll say, Member A thinks that we should do this. Okay, so this is called a serial communication. And what happens as a result of it is that without having a meeting where everyone can participate and hear from each other and where the public is listening in on the thought process, you've been able to circumvent this rule, solicit the views of individual members, and thus, make a decision essentially, or set a direction. So that's called a serial meeting, and we want to avoid that kind of situation. What makes this difficult is the use of email and the use of social media. So when we talk about there shouldn't be the use of technological devices, I think for a while, email became the predominant, or texting became the predominant form of, just kind of communicating outside of meeting. But you could still run afoul of meeting rules if you're all talking by email. And so I'm sure Chris is well aware of this, and there's a communication function that'll be important, that will be perhaps either consultants or the district folks will reach out to the committee. They will be providing you information. They will be maybe asking you about your availability for something or your interest in a particular activity. What we don't want to do is all start replying all, right? It's that I'm going to reply and then you're going to hear me. And then pretty soon we're just all chatting by email. And okay, that would be a violation of the meeting rules. And then I wanted to spend just a moment, brand new, January 1, we have some new rules about the use of social media that have been added to the Brown Act. The Brown Act didn't used to say anything really even acknowledging social media, but I think we've gotten some interesting twists on things as people use these forms of communication more and more often. And I'm just going to boil them down to a couple of concepts. So you are not prohibited from using social media in your personal life, unrelated to what you're doing on this committee. So you can maintain that social media, Facebook, Twitter, whatever you want to do. You are allowed to use social media to provide or solicit information to or from members of the public or answer questions about the things that this committee is doing. However, what the Brown Act says we cannot do is we may not directly respond to any communication from another member regarding committee business, even if it's less than a majority of the members. Now, this is sort of a new concept, and for those of us who are still kind of reeling, trying to interpret what this actually means. So let me give you kind of an example I've cooked up. Maybe you're on Facebook, you have decided, or maybe the committee has decided, hey, let's all go back to our corners and talk to the people we know in our social circles and ask them, what do they think is the highest priority for community need for property in our area? And you want to do a little survey. And so you put out a survey on Facebook, and you really got a good purpose. You're just trying to get some feedback. But instead, you're friends with some of these other committee members. And so other committee members maybe start responding. Oh, hi, Sylvia, what a great survey. I really hope that the community thinks that we should do X. I'm really against us giving away any property for, this reason or that reason, right? So what's happened there now by that committee member responding to you on issues that are directly relevant to this, they've now violated the Brown Act, okay? So with the social media, and this is kind of a new concept, even if it's less than a majority, even if it's one person, don't engage with each other, okay? I'm just gonna say, don't engage with each other on your social media if it's about this stuff. If it's about, you're both parents at a school and you want to talk about a school event, fine. But when it's about this stuff, please don't do that. And generally, you have to avoid, an otherwise permissible use of social media that would result in a discussion between a majority of committee members regarding this business. So let's just say, let's twist on the theme here. Chris puts out a message, or there's a Facebook page for the school district, and somebody puts out, maybe committee members, remember there's a 7-Eleven committee tonight. You're all welcome to attend. The meeting starts at 5:30. The committee members now start weighing in, even if it's just emojis or likes, once you've got, so that's not you talking to each other, so it doesn't violate the rule I just talked about. But if 6 of you all start commenting, that would be a violation of these new rules. So it seems like kind of an easy concept, but when you start really thinking about how do people interact and what are the sort of inadvertent traps that you could fall into, you can see that this could become a slippery slope. And so I just have some general recommendations for you all. You're not going to be meeting all that long. I would suggest that you minimize communications with committee members outside of a notice meeting by any means. You may be solicited for when can you meet, or would you like to do this? Don't use reply all. There are procedural issues. You may be asked to respond to Chris or to Jennifer or somebody who's trying to set something up, much more of a procedural issue. Just don't use reply all, just reply to the source. Feel free to use social media to elicit information or share information with the public about what the committee's doing, but not as a discussion forum to involve other committee members, whether it's one or more. Just don't do it. And I would say, and I think Chris said this at the beginning, seek feedback from the district. If you have any question or you're feeling suddenly like, I don't know if this is a problem or I'm nervous, there's a lot of knowledge that resides in the school district from just, years of this is the mode that school boards operate under all the time. And perhaps they have some strategies or thoughts for how to get your questions answered without you being, worried that you've just committed a Brown Act violation. All right, I just have a couple of more things to mention. So you already know from being here tonight that meetings are open to the public. There must be a posted agenda and there will be minutes associated with every meeting. I'm not sure who's taking the minutes, but I'm sure there is somebody who is taking the minutes of this, or actually you're recording too. So we may use the recording to derive the minutes. It will be a 72-hour notice requirement for regular meetings. I understand that the meeting schedule has already been set. I would regard all of your meetings as regular meetings. I understand from the district that we will be giving more than 72 hours notice in most cases because we will post on a Friday. And that will then probably really be about 5 days notice, I think. So we will always be on the conservative side that you can expect that on the Friday before a meeting, that notice will get posted. Just so you know, and we're just going to follow a lot of what the school board does because they've laid a lot of foundation for these virtual meetings. In normal times, there are many requirements about your physical location and where you are at the time of a meeting, but a lot of those were suspended with the governor's pandemic order last year, and they have continued to allow for these virtual meetings and for us to not be physically together and for us to not have to have a physical location where people come. So you don't, I guess one of the good things about it is that we don't have to worry about all of those things because we'll be just kind of using this virtual format as far as I know. And we'll just follow procedurally the same protocols that the school board is using with regard to how we elicit comment. Districts are doing all different kinds of things with regard to how they take public comment in these kinds of virtual meetings. And so we're just gonna, I think the district has laid the groundwork for what they would like to do, and we'll just follow those requirements the same way. In terms of the public's rights, so we already talked about the fact the agenda has to allow for comment on agenda items either before or during consideration of an item. The agenda has to allow for comment on non-agenda items, unless somebody shows up and has a comment about something that has nothing to do with your charge. At that point, you don't have to allow that comment. We didn't have anybody tonight to make non-agenda comments, but it's possible that somebody will want to do so in the future. The committee can place reasonable time limits on particular topics or speakers. Jennifer already covered that we're going to do a 20 minutes per topic, 3 minutes per speaker, to follow the same protocols as the school board. As I've noted there, that's just an easy way for us to not have to make up a bunch of new rules because we already have a very good solid model to follow. So with that, that is the end of my prepared comments and slides. I will actually maybe close this thing so we can see each other again. There we go. And I would be happy to take any questions that anybody has at this juncture.
So that's a lot. I hope that I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get so I can see all of you instead of just Janet. I hope that this didn't just put everybody to sleep or wasn't so much that people are like, oh my gosh, how am I going to deal with this? This is something that we will navigate. We will get through this. There will be questions that come up on the fly. And it's a lot. I mean, the Brown Act is a lot. The purposes of the committee is a lot, but we will continue to work on these topics. And I know it feels a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. So if there are no more questions for Janet, we will let her get on with her evening and we will carry on with our meeting.
All right.
I have a quick question.
Yes,
Again, my name is Almas. If a person need to leave the meeting in between for any reason, like 10 minutes or so, is there any protocol for that or just can leave it?
We're going to talk a little bit about norms, but here's the thing, where the pandemic is a crazy time. You know, I always want us to be thoughtful and respectful of each one of your individual needs and your family needs as we go through this. So, you know, if you need something comes up in your house, and you'll see me step away from the screen every once in a while. So I think we want to honor that we're full-time members of this committee when we're here, but we're also full-time members of our lives at the same time. And so we need a quick break to take care of something for ourselves or our family. You know, we need to do that and just get back as quickly as we can. That would be great.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I'm taking my break now. Thank you.
You got it.
Well, thank you all.
Okay. Thank you, Janet.
Best of
Take
luck.
care.
I'll look forward to hearing about your work.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. So the next item on our agenda is a discussion action item. This is something that we will need to take a vote on. And I'm going to turn it over to Jen. Jen is going to lead us through a process where we select a committee chair and a committee vice chair.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so you are an appointed committee by the Board of Trustees, and in that appointment, there needs to be a chair and a vice chair, like Chris said. So I'm going to give a little bit of information about it, and then I'm sure everybody's going to raise their hand because you all want this responsibility. But the committee chair is selected by the committee, and they'll serve as the head of the committee. The chair is going to work with staff and the consultants to set the agenda, calls the committee together formally to performance duties laid out by the Board of Trustees, and then facilitate the meeting to ensure that business is conducted in an orderly fashion. So if someone is going off topic or onto an additional agenda item that hasn't yet been closed, you'll call them back to order on the item that we're speaking to in that point. So that's the role of the chair. The role of the vice chair is the same role as the chair if the chair isn't there. So in the case that the chair either isn't available or no longer can serve on the committee, you'll then promote as vice chair to chair and assume those responsibilities. This next process that we're going to go through is, you as the 11 committee members putting forth if you're interested in the opportunity or if somebody would like to nominate. So you can either self-nominate or someone can nominate another member of the committee to serve as the chair. And if we have multiple nominations, we then do a vote. Yes, Meg.
Hi, thank you for that explanation. And I am not interested in serving as the chair or the vice chair, but I was reading some of the bios and I really think I would like to nominate Ali as the chair.
Thank you. So we have one nomination. Do I have any other nominations or do I have a second for Ali?
I'll second.
Wow, I got to remember what I put on my bio. Sure, I'll accept the nomination.
Okay. Do we have any other interested parties or any other nominations for chair? All right, so there's a motion on the table. Can everybody, all members, raise their hand if they're in favor? All right, looks like everybody voted except for Almas. She's not in the
And Ali did not vote.
Oh, and Ali, exactly.
There he is.
Okay, anyone not in favor? I think everybody voted in favor. So, all right.
Before we move on to the vice chair, I just want to add something. Is that the chair and the vice chair are going to get a lot of support from two really great people and one person that's better than average. So the two really great people are Jennifer and Ellen in the superintendent's office here with me. The average person is me. And so you are not going to be flying solo on this work. You're going to get a lot of help on this. And we will do everything we can to maximize the importance of the role and minimize the effort that you have to put into the work. So just know that you're not flying solo on this. And Ali, you could always nominate Meg back, I mean, that's an alternative.
I got to read her profile and see what she
There you go.
No, thank you guys.
Wonderful, thank you. Since we have a chair, Ali, do you want to go forward with selecting the vice chair, or do you want me to go ahead and do that and then?
No, you could go ahead. We can see if somebody else wants to.
Okay. Is there anyone interested in the role of vice chair or any nominations for vice chair? Don't all raise your hands at the same time. Meg?
I mean, okay, I think if I have the support of the of Ellen and you, that would be great. And if Chris weighs in every now and then, but again, I think Ali's got it covered, but sure, I could vice chair.
Together we will do this. Together.
Okay. I think we'll be a good team. If that's, I mean, again, I'm not doing anything if you've got there.
No, we will
sure.
absolutely, like Chris said, Ellen and I, along with Chris and our team, are supportive throughout this entire process. And I think Chris said it perfectly. We're not going to overburden anyone on the committee with the clerical tasks, but it is a role and function that is needed.
Sure.
Okay.
I will step up if everyone approves. So
okay, thanks. So Meg has self-nominated. Do I hear a second? Mary? All in favor? All right. Keep your hands up. Sorry. Just want to make sure I got everybody. All right. I think we got everybody. Any opposed? Nope. All right, Meg and Ali, thank you so much.
I'm gonna, since Ali and Meg were considered enough to take on this important role, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this meeting rather than handing it off to them, which is the usual structure. And then I'll work with them to make sure they're ready for the start of the next meeting. I appreciate you guys stepping up in this important role. So the next item is a staff report. This is not something that you need to make any decisions on. Plenty of opportunities for you to ask questions. And I am going to, Jennifer, I'm going to share my screen, or do you want to share your screen? Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second here. Okay. I am screen sharing. I can't see any of you at all, but I'm assuming that you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
We can only see it in the present. We can't see it in presentation mode yet.
Oh, interesting. Okay, let me back out of this.
I
And
see it.
I will try again. Always works well in practice, right? Now I got a super weird screen going on. Okay, we'll try a different way here. Man, I should have let the chair do this stuff.
It's good enough there if you just want to, click on the number 2. It's got the slides on the left.
Oh, interesting. Super
But
weird.
It's
If
fine.
you
I
go
mean,
view, can you do view? Click view and then it'll start.
we're down on the bottom or slideshow.
Or I can share my screen, Chris.
Why don't you do that, Jen? I'm just getting some super weird thing that I've never gotten before, and I'm sure I could figure it out, but it's just going to take more time than it's worth. That wouldn't happen to Ali, I'm telling
everyone.
you.
So there's like the best part about Zooming, right? Is all the technical difficulties. Oh my goodness.
But we get to have each other's backs.
Right. Okay. Hold, please. Share my screen. Oh. You don't want to see everybody that's in the meeting, do you? All right. You can see the presentation now, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Apologize for that. Take it away, Chris.
All right. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to talk about why we're here. You've heard this lots of times, but essentially we need to look at the way that we're using our space and making sure that we're using it best to achieve our educational goals. Here's the education code that covers it. And so we have some really important decisions to make. Our board is committed to short and long-term fiscal sustainability. We know that the only way that we can continue to meet our educational goals is if we're meeting our financial goals. And in a time of declining enrollment, that makes it harder and harder for the district to achieve that goal. And so with that in mind, we're bringing you together to do this important work. Sorry, I'm a little disjointed right here. Jen, do you want to move forward?
Yes,
so
of course. Okay.
Go ahead, Jen, take it away.
I'm going to take the easy slides. I make him, Chris does all the hard work. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so as you know, the committee meeting dates, you should have received all your calendar invites for that. There was one that was formally April 14th. We've changed that to, it's been changed to the 21st, and everybody was notified. We do have a May 5th optional meeting. As we go through and later in this presentation, we'll describe the process that and the data that you're going to be given and be able to review and analyze. You may need that 5th meeting, right? So we have that as optional. All the meetings are via Zoom, 5:30 start time. It's our intention and goal as a committee and us, assisting with the process to keep it to the 2 hours that we've told the community and the committee as before you applied. So that is the goal, and we'll do our best. Meeting process, you have seen that process this evening roll out. This is just a normal process, call to order. You're going to approve the agenda. We'll have the non-agenda public comment. Staff may or may not have a report. We as consultants may be giving a report. There could be opportunities for discussion or action on specific items. Then you'll adjourn, and we'll also remind you of what the next meeting is. We always do that. Some meeting norms, and Chris, you can jump in on this anytime you'd like, but
yeah, I'm happy to jump in on the meeting norms. These are sort of standard meeting norms. These are the commitments that we want to make. These are the things that help us maximize our efficiency and our effectiveness, make sure we get done on time. If we want to have 2-hour meetings, we need to make sure that we're present, that we're focused, that we're not doing a lot of sidebar conversations or being distracted by the various things, particularly cell phones. We want to always do our best to be positive and solution oriented, acknowledging that we're going to be talking about difficult things that impact our students, our staff, our community. We want to make sure that we discuss the things that we can change. It's so easy to get caught up in all the things that we can't. We want to make sure that at all points we keep the students at the center of the focus for our decision making. It's okay for us to thoughtfully challenge different ideas that show up at the table. We just need to make sure that we do that thoughtfully and respectively. It's some of the best decisions that I make are made after disagreements with other of my team members. And I continue to remind them that we need to have disagreements as we go through processes. We need to hear different voices. And sometimes I encourage people to take on thoughts that aren't even their own because they're out there in the community and we need to hear them as part of the process. So these are the norms that we have put forward as suggested norms. We can always add to these, change these. If the committee has any recommendations to change the norms, it'd be a good time for us to do that. We will refer back to these at times where we're making those difficult decisions or having those hard conversations. So it's important that we do have agreement around them, even though it's informal agreement. So anybody have any suggestions for changes or thoughts on the norms? Okay, hearing none, we'll keep moving. Thank you. All right, and just, when we're all in the world of Zoom, we hope that a good norm is always that we're on time, that you use your name on the on your Zoom screen. That helps especially with a group where we don't know each other well. Jennifer has gone in and changed your names a little bit and added your role, whether you're a member or an alternate, and the numbers. When you're in a Zoom environment, do your best to find a quiet place, acknowledging that sometimes the dog's going to bark or the truck's going to drive by or the kid's going to ask mom for something. We understand all those things. It's best if we have ourselves on mute the vast majority of the time until we're ready to speak. And then sometimes we're going to forget to unmute ourselves and somebody's going to remind us. I've already done that at least once tonight. We ask that you share your video unless there's some super compelling reason in the moment to not share your video. And that we ask that we really listen when other people are talking, even if it's something that is outside of maybe what we want to hear in the moment, we give them a chance and we hear them out. So again, thoughts about these Zoom norms? Okay, we'll keep going. So I mentioned you're going to hear this a lot of times. You know, every district in California's most important asset is their children, then their staff, and then their physical assets that they have. A lot of districts get themselves into really bad straits by doing a couple of things. One, by keeping way too many properties and not using way too many properties that they don't need. But more importantly, by getting rid of properties that they could end up needing in the big picture, or not leveraging those processes or those properties, as Ron was mentioning earlier. And that's one of the reasons why the 7-11 process exists, to make sure that it slows the district down and make sure that they're making wise decisions about getting rid of some of the only important asset that they really can get rid of. And Jen, I'll let you talk about the next part there.
Yes, I'd like to introduce Rob Murray. He's our Director of Demographics and Planning, and I'm heading and helping with the facilitation, but Rob is really doing a lot of the detailed data analysis. So he's going to walk you through some of the items that Sylvia mentioned earlier and our process behind that. Go ahead, Rob.
Yep, thank you, Jennifer, and great to start meeting everyone, seeing faces to go with some names. You haven't heard as much from me tonight. That is definitely going to change next meeting as we get into, as Sylvia brought up, there's a lot of information that you would like to see, that you would like to begin processing. And so what we're going to start off with is just something that I mentioned for those of you who were there at the last meeting, but just kind of a mentality of just where you've been, where you are, where you're going. We're really just here to educate and support you with anything that you would like to know about. We will make sure that you learn as much as you want about it. We're going to start off looking at bigger picture and high level things. We're going to just look at just kind of across the board, your enrollment, what your enrollment trends are, what's going on with where your students live versus where they go to school, what that means for where things are right now, and then where all that data is pointing towards, from an enrollment standpoint particularly, where you are likely to be over the next few years. And then we will then get into more of those specific facilities. We will look at, of course, you know, all these things with enrollment as one big piece of the puzzle, but you also want to be comparing that to the amount of enrollment these facilities are built to comfortably and effectively maintain. And we'll just match all of that up as we get more and more specific. Again, we can look into all kinds of issues relating to just the condition of the site, the age of the sites, the potential for various other things that the sites could be used for. But again, starting off, we're really just going to be looking at not just looking at some high level things, but really making sure that everyone understands how these data are being used, what we're taking into consideration, and hopefully making sure that everyone is comfortable and basically in agreement on the numbers that we're looking at before we then start using those numbers to justify particular decisions or particular directions to pursue in more detail going forward.
And Rob, sorry, there's some more slides going forward. I just want to make sure you didn't touch on it all in that first point, but I don't believe you did. There's kind of, again, we're going to walk you through all the data that Rob said, but then there's a process of analyzing that data as a committee. And so, you know, go ahead, Rob. Sorry, I jump in, but.
Oh, no, I'm sure you would do an excellent job, but yes, one thing, and that part of it is the committee will, on some level, decide how it wants to approach this. You can do it really, you can decide you really want to make criteria, you want to lay things out in kind of formulas and quantities and really make a kind of quantitative assessment of things, and we can give you the data to provide that. You might want it to be more of a just discussion setting where we just like to just really kind of be looking at numbers and just have more of a qualitative discussion about things relating to that. But again, ultimately, we're here to support and provide information for the things that will address the pertinent questions that you are bringing up and answering. And I think one of the main things will be identifying coming into each meeting what we want to have accomplished by the end of that meeting, and kind of us kind of providing some tools that will help you get there. And Jennifer and the Ali and Meg kind of all working to just keep everything directed, keep everything relevant. As Chris has also mentioned, we're operating on some really tight time frames, so we just want to make the best use of this time that we have together a couple of times every month.
Absolutely. And I think we'll help to continue, like Rob said, drive the process, understand what information that you need to be able to move on to the next decision point. Then that's where we come to reaching actually a decision with the data that we provided. That's the task that the board has given you. The Board of Trustees would like you to come back with a report. So from the data that we've provided and the questions and the public comment and hearing periods that we're going to be initiating through these meetings, you'll reach a decision, hopefully collectively or throughout the thought process and thought partnering process Chris described. And then we'll work together in the actual meeting to draft a report. We'll do that a couple times. We'll get a final, and there's some work that may be, required in between meetings in regards to reviewing the data that we provide you ahead of the board meeting and being thoughtful about that to make sure that we all come together with whatever base data was provided. But that will really then drive to the end result of your tasks, is to provide the recommendation to the trustees. Is there any questions or any other thoughts, Chris, that you have to share or add?
No, let's let Sylvia, I think, had a question.
Okay, perfect.
Well, you'll find out I have a lot of questions. So I have a couple questions. The first one is that I did read in the Marine IGA, the district is out looking for RFPs on the process, on the assets that we have. And the second one is, since we're projecting into the future, and we have seen the Fireman's Fund has been purchased, and and also with the pandemic, there's a little bit change to probably how people work. They go from working in the city, they go to remote learning, and also people are moving into a suburb more, the younger families. That's the second one. So I guess my question is, do we look into the future and look at all this as consideration, or is it too far out for us to think right now?
Rob, I'm going to let you touch on the second bullet, but I just wanted to, on the first bullet, Chris, or the first question in regards to the FQ or the RFQ, do you want to touch base on that, or would you like me to?
Yeah, no, I'll let Yancey's here. I'll let Yancey touch on where we are with the RFQ for development partners. Before I do that, just since I'm talking, I'll touch on the idea of the Fireman's Fund and potential housing. Rob will certainly explore that. It's pretty far out in the pipeline. It's all zoned commercial right now also. So there's going to have to be some pretty significant discussions to get that rezoned if it's going to be residential. But the reality is that Novato's been in declining enrollment for a very long time. We've had the same number of schools when we had over 1,000 additional students beyond what we have right now. Our new normal of elementary schools, just in the time that I've been here, for each class within an elementary school has gone from about 600 to about 500. So irregardless, I think, of what happens at the Fireman Fund property, and what we see happening with the flight to suburbia from the city, with the changes to the ability to work remotely, I think that this is probably, it doesn't really change the calculus so much on the need. But again, that's for the community, this committee to explore, and Rob to help us navigate with his data. So with that, I'll turn it over to Yancey to talk about the RFQ for development partners.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks for the opportunity, everybody. Welcome. So yeah, we went out at the beginning of the year for an RFQ for development partners. We've had a pre-submittal conference and the question period is over. Those submittals are due actually next week on the 9th. So we're excited. We've had very significant interest over, I want to say we had over 30 potential development partners on our pre-submittal call in mid-January. Our next steps after we receive the submittals is to whittle that down to a number that we will interview as a team. And after those interviews, we will select one or a group of development partners to bring to the board as qualified development partners. And then we will start to move forward in the process, along with the work of this committee, actually, around developing potential workforce housing moving forward. So, is there any questions?
Yeah, Yancey, this is Ron. Were the RFQs for housing for faculty and staff? Thank you.
Yeah, they were specifically as for a development partner around workforce housing, but it also it had multiple potential, all the way from, you know, looking at sites all the way to developing, you know, looking at excess sites and potentially selling those sites, and all the way to operating workforce housing once it is built. So it was really a soup to nuts look, and that's why we may select one or multiple potential partners to qualify and potentially work with moving forward.
All right, Rob, you want to touch on the other part of Sylvia's question that I didn't quite answer completely?
Yeah, no, we'd be happy to, and I'm excited that people are asking some really specific and pertinent questions already. I would just say partly be a little patient, as next week you will definitely get your fill of a lot of information. But yes, the sale of the Fireman's Fund property is something that we've been keeping an eye on. I've been talking with city planners quite a bit about not just that, but other current and potential development going on in the city. That is all things that we will be telling you a lot about. And then yes, in terms of you know, just this year and everything going on with a lot of the big systemic and societal changes that are happening and what effects those might have, to the extent that anyone can, I think that we can show you how we're approaching that and how we're integrating some of that thinking into the projections of the district's future enrollment. And I will, you'll just have to wait until the next meeting to get the specifics on that, because it's not part of what we're talking about tonight, but just do try to rest assured that it is certainly among the many things that we've been considering as we've been assembling the data that we'll be using for this committee.
Hi, my name is Shrikala. I have a couple questions. The first one, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, it's a little better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first question that I had was around the inputs that we'll be getting. So in addition to the enrollment, are we also going to be looking at the view into what the district is looking at as a goal or strategy for the next, X number of years, so that we know what you're planning for the district? That's question number one. The question number two is, since we don't meet after the recommendation to the board, is there a touch-in with the board before, the board meeting itself to make sure that we are going in the right track, or there are other, aspects that the board would want us to look at? Lastly, just, on the meeting itself, I wanted to understand, since we are gathering, community voice, is there going to be, a translator for, Spanish-speaking families, community members that want to express? Because Oftentimes there's a lot of way that English speakers can express and bring their point of view, but you don't have that much avenue for Spanish speaking community members.
Yeah, I'm happy to touch on those. Sri, I want you to help me better understand your first question. You talked about what would the goal of the district be over the next couple of years. Can you help me, give me a little more background so I can better answer that question?
I mean, I'll take this. I'm not even saying that this should be your goal or this is what you should be looking at, but I'm just taking this as an example. We've been, almost a year into remote learning, and there are probably a few, a percentage of students that are willing to do a remote learning all their, academic year. So if you are going to start that and go into that avenue, then that is a different thing. The enrollment is, should be looked at in a different way. I'm just, throwing that as an example, not that that's what, your goal should be.
Yeah, that's great. That helps give me a lot of context. I appreciate that. Yes, when I'm having my conversations and my team is having our conversations with Rob about, sort of future plans for the district, we have to consider some of the impacts that we've seen from COVID. One of them is we've seen a dramatic decrease in enrollment in the district over the course of the year, over about 400 students when we anticipated to lose about 100. And so, one of the things that we're doing is we're working with Leslie Benjamin to do a survey of those families to sort of gauge their interest in returning, depending upon next year looking different ways. Another thing that we're looking at doing is in the 21-22 school year, continuing to do a virtual learning academy that mostly targets NUSD students. But in the 2022-2023 school year, we would consider allowing students from anywhere in the county, in the state, to transfer into our virtual learning academy in a way to attempt to increase enrollment in NUSD. And although that doesn't affect the facilities necessarily, it does impact our revenue, which is a nice thing for us. So yeah, so that's the way we will be thinking. We'll be engaging with Rob about those sorts of ideas so he can consider them in his thinking. The second question was, how do we know we're aligned with the board? The board has given me pretty broad parameters for how we're going to move forward. As appropriate, I will check in with the board president and the vice president about where we're going. I have a feeling that we're very well aligned with where we're going. If I check in with them and they say, whoa, whatever, I can bring that back to the committee. But this is a committee that runs independent of the board. You're appointed by the board, but you are not an arm of the board. So this committee is going to take its own path, and that's as it should be. They trusted you in this role. And then in regards to translation services, we're always happy to have translation available at our meetings if needed. And so we'll monitor that need as we move forward with these meetings. And if there's a need, we certainly would be easily adapted to have a bilingual translation or going on during our meeting. So that wouldn't be a challenge if there was a need.
I got a question, Chris.
Yeah.
Regarding the RFQ, so are these developers bidding on, or just, so do they know what we'll know next week on what sites they are? Are they coming up with ideas of what we're going to put there? And we're going to know that throughout this process? I mean, I just want to know what was the idea of getting these guys on board, and what are they going to tell us?
Yeah, so I'll let Yancey talk to that.
Thanks, Ollie. The RFQ process really is more of a long-term process, but it will be going hand in hand with this committee as they look at some of our property. So there's pre-development work that needs to be done, and probably the first thing that we will need to do is determine, if we're going to move forward with workforce housing on our own property, where would we put that? Would we look at the San Andreas property? Would we look at the C Street properties? Would we look at, if we potentially close an elementary school, would we look at that site? And so that is kind of the pre-development services are one of the services that we will be looking at as we move forward. But it just is the first process, but it may be the most important process because you gotta find out that. But the reason it'll work so importantly with this group is, this group is going to make some recommendations around potential school closure. This committee is going to look at some of our assets in terms of, what are we using our assets for? Are we using them in the most effective way possible? And as we move forward. So I think the recommendations out of this committee will help direct our development partner in how they make recommendations to us moving forward.
I had a quick question regarding the staff housing. Is that only for staff housing, or if it's not fully utilized by staff, would that be available then to the general public?
We'd have to have a lot of rules about that. It would be for our staff first, and then typically what happens if there is vacancies, then that would go to other public agencies that we're partnering with to fill that space. So it could be, we could partner with Marin County Office of Education or Miller Creek School District to fill the vacant spots. We would have a lot of work to do to determine what that looks like, but typically that's the next step should we have vacancies. Yancey, did I get that?
Yeah, that is, before we open it up to the general public, there are significant tax implications of doing that. If we use our educational partners, there are obvious tax benefits to doing that. So not to say that you can't do it, but definitely, Chris, you are correct. And obviously our goal would be to build to the level of need for our teachers and not overbuild.
Are you gearing the workforce housing for the faculty or staff primarily renting, or will you be looking at some ownership opportunities as well? Thank you.
I think the current idea is renting, but we'll be open to looking at other options as we move forward. Jennifer, I think you're the next question, and then Sylvia.
Sorry about that. I have a question about this committee. I was on the last committee, Chris, when, so I'm hearing a lot of the same words. I'm hearing a lot of the same subjects. I'm hearing, is there a way to find out, or is there a way to present what was recommended to the board last time and what things have been done that were recommended and what didn't work?
Yeah, I'll talk with the team and see if there's an opportunity for us to do that. I do know that at my presentation at the board meeting, which is of course recorded and on our website, that might be the easiest way for me to get you guys that information and not take up time in this meeting, is to get you the link to the right meeting and the right time in the meeting where I talked about that, because they made lots of different recommendations and we implemented probably 85 to 90% of them, with the other ones just not having any significant return on investment. So yeah, that's a great question, Jennifer. I'll work with the team to make that happen and get that out to you guys. Okay, Sylvia.
Okay, back to me again. Thank you for sharing. You talk about the district strategy, and you also mentioned that you will be looking at possibly offering remote learning throughout. So this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. For example, our marketing of our district, we have some great program, Marine School of Arts and the STEM program. And many years ago, the only other time I went to a district to talk about is to keep the GATE program. And we have a really great, how do you say, the GATE program is self-contained gate program. And I thought that would be something that we can expand and really attract a lot of students into the district. So things like that, could it be something that you will also be looking at in order to try, doing this process to see how we can project the increase of the enrollment, or just be outside of the purview of what we're doing, looking into the future? So that's one question. The second one is really easy to answer. Are we going to look at census data? And if we do we look at 2020 or not?
So I'll get the first question, which is about marketing, and then I'll let Rob talk about census data. One of the recommendations from the elementary school size committee from several years ago was to actively engage with a marketing firm to help us with our enrollment. We did work with a company called Target River for 2 years. We feel like they were helpful to us in increasing enrollment or maintaining enrollment. When we got into the pandemic, we were looking at every place that we could save money, and we knew that this was going to be a hard year for us to market ourselves anyways. And so we've taken a year off from that this year. But I have a meeting with Brian Epperson from Target River in the next couple of weeks, and we're going to talk about how he might be able to help us again moving forward. We're just really careful about when we use contractors and when we don't. We've got to think, if we're going to use them, we got to think that there's a fiscal benefit to it. So that's that part. And Rob, you're going to talk about the census data stuff.
Yes, that's a great question. In terms of actual 2020 census data, if that data becomes available during the period that we expect this committee to meet, it will be well into the process. And that's assuming, I've been hearing mixed reports about the extent to which that data release is proceeding on schedule. So at this point, we certainly have your benchmarks of kind of looking at trend lines, your 2000 and 2010 full count census data, and then all the years in between 2010 up to the most recent American Community Survey release of 2019 survey data and estimates that was just released in December. And so we are using the latest and greatest available data, and should anything brand new just come hot off the press, we'll certainly fold that into what we're looking at, particularly if it does shed light on anything that had been to any degree uncertain. But as of now, I can just say that we're using the best data that the census has put at our disposal.
Okay, Jen, are you tracking who's got the next question?
Okay, I'm back. 2 questions again. The first one is on the teacher housing. I don't want to belabor the topic, but had a question on whether the housing has to be just housing, or can it also be commercial plus housing, something like a live work, so that you can generate additional revenue. Second question is around Measure G. So is that sort of out of scope of this exercise, or is that also included in this?
So Measure G would not be included in this process necessarily. I mean, I guess it could touch. It would be, Measure G could be impacted because there could be projects at certain sites that we could end up deciding not to do as a result of school closure. I mean, we want to make sure that, again, we be good stewards of those dollars. But that would be the only way that Measure G would come into this conversation. And I'm sorry, I forgot the first question. What was the first? Just give me a keyword from the first question.
The live work for teacher housing.
Oh yeah, the commercial, mixed residential commercial. I think it just depends on the property and what, whether we feel like that property can be used both ways, the zoning, the complexity of the project. I think we could certainly explore that for sure. I'd just be honest, I think it's unlikely, but who knows? As Ron said earlier, we got to be creative here. Okay, Almas.
Yeah.
I got it right this time, not like last time.
So I'm considering Maslow's need of hierarchy at this point, and just asking the question that, are we considering socioeconomic status of the families during making this decision?
Of the school that we close,
Yes.
that we could
Yeah.
recommend that we
Yeah.
close?
So like whether they have the rights, those kind of the things, but how the student is going to commute. I think Janet mentioned that in the very beginning that, yeah.
I think definitely one of the things that we will need to consider moving forward is how students, where students live, where their schools are, how students get to school, you know, the roads that they're crossing. All of those things are things that we will consider as we move forward. We can't and shouldn't assume that everybody is going to get a ride to school in a car. That's the wrong model. So yes, that's definitely something that we consider. Not necessarily from a socioeconomic status, but just from a student safety status. Rob and Jen, any way that socioeconomic status comes into this conversation that I'm not thinking of?
Sure. I mean, among the things that we already have kind of at our disposal, provided with some of the initial data that we got from the district, we at least do have the free or reduced lunch status. Again, and we have anonymized, that's a hard word to get out on the first try, but student lists, so no names, but we have student IDs, and then we can look at addresses, school of attendance, as well as looking at things with English language proficiency, free and reduced lunch status, special educational programs, just so that we are considering particularly looking at these things mapping wise, if there is a spatial concentration or component to any of this, certainly looking at the enrollment of schools, and that is actually something that the committee gets to decide the extent to which that becomes a priority in what you're looking at. But yes, there is at least certainly some data that we can give you to help shed some light on that facet of the decision.
Okay, good. Thank you, Rob. Before we jump to Steve with his question, there was a question put in the Q&A about 15 minutes ago. I want to make sure, 10 minutes ago. I want to make sure we touch on that. This is a question for Yancey. Yancey, what other school districts in the Bay Area currently have housing available to teachers? And I can just say that this is something that's extremely rare. It is something that it's a long pipeline typically, but there are examples of it. So I'll let Yancey talk to that.
So the first one that I know of is the Santa Clara Unified School District. They have the Casa de Maestro project that's now a little over 20 years old, and they have 2 phases of that. Also, the San Mateo Community College District has 3 projects down on the peninsula. And those are the 2 that I know of significantly that are up and running and have been going for a while. There are a number of school districts, and you've probably seen it in the news, from Pacifica to San Francisco Unified to Palo Alto, and a group of Santa Clara districts that are looking at moving towards that. It's a common model at the university level that we see, at Stanford or UC Irvine, or, have significant holdings for employee housing. But the 2 models that we look at in the Bay Area for K kind of 14 are the Santa Clara Unified and San Mateo Community College District.
I would add that Sonoma State has one in Rohnert Park as well. And that's the closest I know of.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Steve.
Yeah, hi. I've been in district for 22 years, I think. And one of the things I'm most proud of is the equity work we do in Nevada Unified School District. And we have done a ton of work around the equity imperative. Is there any thoughts about using the equity imperative to drive our work as this committee to ensure that we have a broad perspective of all the families and the students that we serve?
Yeah, it's a good thought, Steve. Thank you. I'll make sure that we make sure that the equity imperative even though it's in the midst of being revised, it's a little stale, a little dusty. We'll get that to the committee so they know that that's an important sort of what we call one of our North Star documents, along with our mission, vision, and values. So happy to get that to the committee. Great idea. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mary, you're next.
Okay, thank you. I just had a quick question, clarifying question on the process. So if we choose as a committee to recommend to the board to close a school, we're just recommending that. Are we also then recommending a school to close, or just the closure of a school?
So you would be recommending a specific school to close. And that's hard. I just want to, I mean, both are hard. You know, recommending that we need to close a school is hard, but putting a name on it and a face on it, and 250 or 300 kids' faces on it, that's really hard work. The one thing to remember is that this recommendation will come in May. We are talking about school closure not for next year. We're talking about school closure for the 22-23 school year. So we would then spend a whole year making sure that we do everything we can to make that as smooth a transition as we can for the kids. One of the things we heard about the Hill school closure is it happened too fast. There wasn't enough time to make a transition. And so it was really, really rocky for kids and families. And we're committed to making sure that that doesn't happen in this case, should we find ourselves in a position where the board decides to close the school. So just remember that we're going to take a steady and thoughtful approach to this work. It looks like Alejandra has a question.
Yes. Hello, good evening. So if we will be recommending that X school will be closed, in this committee, we will be hearing or listening to the parents of that school, or we will just recommend it to the board, and then the parents can come to the board meeting and express their concerns? Or it's always hard, that one. So I'm pretty sure that there will be a lot of parents that will like to make their voice to be heard.
Yes, I think that the parents' voice will be heard in both places, here and at the school board level. Yeah. And then I would anticipate that we will go out and have community forum meetings at those campuses to answer their questions and discuss with them, the decision and the recommendation. This wouldn't be just like, we make a decision, the board makes a decision, and we don't talk to them anymore. So it's going to be a long process. This is, as Janet said at the beginning, this is the beginning of the process. If we get there, it'll be hard. I mean, it just, there's no two ways around it. But sometimes we have to make hard decisions to do what's right, for what's best for the system. Good question, Alejandra. Thank you. All right, any other questions?
Steve.
One more question. So, Chris, you talked about the system. Are you going to talk about our purpose of the public educational system in Nevada Unified? What do we want from our system? Mm-hmm. To help us guide our work.
Good suggestion.
I got a lot of them, Chris. Just keep on.
I'm sure you do. Let's talk offline. We can do that. You're not 6 members. You're only 1, so I can talk to you. Just write myself a note. Don't want to forget that nugget, Steve.
Are there any other questions?
Okay, seeing no more questions, we'll close this item, which is just a staff report, so we don't have to take any vote on it. And with that, we get to the last item on the agenda. Sometimes it's everybody's favorite item on the agenda. That would be adjournment. Before I adjourn the meeting, I just want to once again thank you for stepping into being part of the solution around this problem, for doing so, knowing that it's going to come with some discomfort, but also, knowing that it's in the best interest of the big picture of Nevada Unified School District. So appreciate all the questions. I appreciate the engagement, appreciate all the suggestions. Ali and Meg, I appreciate you both volunteering one another, or I guess Meg volunteered Ali, then she took the hit herself. So we can always appreciate that. Look forward to working with you both as we navigate this process forward. Again, we'll do everything we can to support you as much as we can to make sure that you find success. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to all the people behind the scenes that are helping us make this meeting work smoothly. There was only one big IT goof up, and that was me, and that's the way I like it. Everything else worked great. I'm okay with being the one that goofed it up a little bit. And with that, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.